Welcome everyone to another interesting session to end our 2001 year. So this is the last session for this year and we are ending with this interesting session, Future of Certification, a panel discussion. With this, I would like to invite Rochelle. Rochelle is going to moderate this particular panel. I invite Rochelle to come on the video and introduce yourself. Over to you, Rochelle.
Awesome, thanks so much. Welcome everyone. Can you see my video? Is it on? I think so. Yeah. Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Rochelle Ruiz. I'm calling in today from Johannesburg, South Africa. It's a nice rainy day, so I've got my tea right next to me. I'm very excited to be part of today's discussion. As what was mentioned, we're going to try and deep dive and get some interesting insights around the future of certification. Now, just a quick word about me. I'm the co-founder of coach and trainer of We Do Change, but these days I feel a little bit more like a sense-making partner, trying to help and make sense of the world in which we live in. I'm very passionate about people and creating opportunities for us to really challenge and change the world for the better. Now, enough said about me. I'm going to introduce the next panelist. Yes, and that will be Dave.
Dave.
Yep, better make sure I get my camera on. Hello people, good afternoon, welcome. I'm Dave Smith, I'm a trainer. If you want to know about me, it's there. Have a look at me on LinkedIn, good enough. Okay, and I'm happy to be here. Next.
Great, thanks Dave. I think then the next panelist that we're going to introduce is going to be David.
Over to you, David.
Hi everybody. Hi, thanks Rochelle. Yeah, me, David. I've been fortunate enough to be in the Agile space for 20 odd years. I'm very passionate about certifications, about delivery, and about people. So I hope to provide a great perspective today. Thank you.
Great. And Prashank, if you can just move to the next slide, and then our next panelist is going to be Johan.
Hi everyone, also calling in from Joburg. My purpose in life is to help other people and other organizations to achieve. I spent my time in business agility, innovation and transformation.
Thank you, everyone. This I will hand over to
Perfect.
Rochelle.
Thank you so much. So, like I mentioned, we're going to have a very interesting conversation around the certification or the future of certification. And I think maybe a good start for us is to do a bit of a temperature check, maybe just to kind of align or open the space around what do we see the current state of certification is, and maybe use that as a platform for us to start off with. And I'm going to invite David to maybe just give us a little bit of a sense of what is the current state of certification.
Well, that's a great question. Thanks, Rochelle. It's interesting because as a trainer, and I spend a lot of time sort of coaching and moving from sort of that mindset where you're certifying people based upon a set of slides to now be more interactive. So I see training at the moment focused on certifications now focused on 3 or 4 main areas. One is providing that competitive space for learners, the ability to be able to provide professional credibility, to manage the earning potentials. So at this moment in time, from my perspective, the way the certifications have moved from being an expectancy to something that can help grow your or improve your opportunities in in aligning to where you want to be. So a lot of the work that I've done so far includes, how can I put it? It's difficult. Maybe Joanne, do you want to elaborate on that? What I'm trying to do is get across the idea that the current certification trends have moved from the typical, here is my certifications, to a need to align to problem solving facilitation rather than expected answers to problems.
Yeah, you know, I think one of the challenges that we have is that there's a dearth of certifications out there. People have got so much to choose from, and it's very difficult for people to actually have a sense of what's worth doing and what's not worth doing. I think people are bewildered. You know, complexity brings inertia, and I think the industry needs to have a serious rethink about what we do and how we do things. I've obviously got ideas about that what and how, but we'll maybe talk about that later. So I think it's difficult for people to make a decision because there's just so much out there.
100%. Sorry, and Yuan, what I'm hearing you saying is because we're in this complexity domain where there isn't necessarily, you know, a straightforward answer of this is the training that you need to do, or if you do X then you'll get Y. There's so many different dimensions in making a decision, and also knowing what if I go this route or if I do the following, what is it really going to add value into applying and actually trying to solve problems in the real life, right? Because I think, Dave, when we spoke earlier, you mentioned something around, you know, in theory, practice and theory is the same thing, but in practice it's not, right? So there's that's difficulty of understanding that. So I'm hearing you say and talking a little bit about the what and the how. So maybe if we can just spend maybe just a few more minutes trying to understand the complexity, using your word, around the what that is out there currently.
Well, certainly I'll deal with the what, and I'm probably going to sound like the middle sibling holding two battling brothers apart here, because I agree and disagree with both of my colleagues in equal measures on that one. For me, I started school at 5, I left school at 16, and I spent 11 years leading up to doing an exam. Then I spent 2 years doing further education, and there was an exam at the end of that, and then 3, 4, 5 years of it university. At the end of this long period of time, there was an exam at the end, and I got a certificate to say I'd actually achieved that qualification. And then at 25, I went on a training course where it was a one-day session, and I got a certificate just for attending. Now, I'm sure many people here have actually sat through 8 hours of a boring lecture, and by God, you need an award to say, oh, yes, I managed to tolerate it. But these certificates were given out willy-nilly just for being there. And I thought, the certificate proves evidence that I'm actually attended the session. It hasn't shown that I actually learned anything from the session. So I recognise when we talk about what is the value of certificates, we need to understand not all certificates are equal. Some of them represent years of blood, sweat and tears. And I'm sure Johan knows that there are many certificates in the EXIM and the Axelos world in which you need to demonstrate a number of years industrial experience before you can even sit the exam. You change to the other side to a CSM or a PSM, those you can actually go on a course. In fact, I think with PSM, you don't even need to attend a course, but you just need to pass the exam. So for me, the certificate simply says you've got X number of questions answered right in an exam. There's no evidence there to actually prove that you know this stuff, just that you can regurgitate it in the exam. So not all certificates are equal. Some are just not worth the paper they're printed on, sadly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll get off my soapbox now.
So can I jump in? I think that the problem that we faced with, and this problem is that not something that started in certification. It started when we started thinking about mass education as this delusion that standardized testing actually is a way to evaluate capability, especially in the workplace. And it's cool to do standardized testing if you just want to test theory, but at the end of the day, especially from an employer's perspective, when somebody says, here's my certificate, you assume that proves that they're capable of doing something. That's a very erroneous assumption. So I'm a big fan of certification that mandates a practical part of the certification. In fact, all of the formal certifications that I'm currently training people in has got a practical component. The problem is that there's a big difference between who delivered the training and who's the person that evaluates that practical work. Because unfortunately, not all training organizations and not all trainers are equal. And I really strongly feel that we need to be a little bit more stringent in terms of who we allow to stand in front of the classroom.
David, I'm wondering, I see you smile. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, if I may. I mean, those are very, very valid points, Joanne. And I think that I look back at when I started my career, and one of the things that I feel is missing here is that certifications are not only designed to provide someone's ability, but their willingness. And I remember that when I wanted to sort of get involved in IT a lot more, one of the opportunities I sought after was to gain certifications, not to prove that I was great at anything, but to continue to encourage myself. And I believe there's still a lot of people out there that require certifications as a stepping stone to encourage themselves, and also to raise their hand and say, hi, I'm not great, but I am willing and I'm able, and can I have a chance? And what we're missing in today's world is the opportunist organizations who are using it to capitalize and force people down a road that doesn't align to their can I have a chance to try this? Can I get my step in the door?
No, I don't disagree with you there. I think that to a large extent is what foundation level certification is. You go and explore, you say, this is cool stuff. I really want to get deeper into this. And hopefully the organization will then give you the opportunity to do so. And I'm happy with foundation level stuff to do standardized testing. But if you've got a certificate that says practitioner or master or auditor, or by golly, you should be able to be a master of something, and being able to do something. Otherwise that paper is not worth the paper it's written on.
I'm going to agree with Johan's point on that, because I actually hold the ITIL expert certification. And when people said to me, you're an ITIL expert, the answer is no, I'm not. I've actually passed the ITIL expert exam. That I learned far more about the topic after the exam and after the training than I did before it. So for me, things like PSM, CSM, they are a black belt in karate. They are passing your driving test. They are the first rung of the ladder. They're not the last one. So growing up, I always saw certifications and qualifications actually being the years of blood, sweat and tears, when in fact it turns out they're not. In some cases, they're just the start of the journey, not the end. I'd like to return to one of Johan's points when he talked about education, because that reminded me of, I think there's an Indian ex-education minister who argued that a lot of problems with the education system is that it's teaching towards exams and certification, not teaching to inspire. And I'm sure David will back me up on this, in the sense of the purpose of training is not simply to transfer knowledge, it's to actually educate and inspire, it's to create a behavioral difference in them. Because there was a question that came up, a very good one as well, about should a trainer not try assuring, should a trainer also be somebody who's assessing the knowledge and practicality after the training course is finished? I don't know if a trainer is the right person for that, but it is putting trainers under the spotlight to say, you're with them for 2 or 3 days. What happens after that? Is there any further support you've got? Have you, in that time, inspired them enough that they're going to continue to grow once you've cut the apron strings? Or are they simply there because the goal of the training is to sit an exam? Once I've got the exam, I can forget all about it because I've memorized 100 Scrum interview questions and that's got me through the paper. It's that scenario. But I will concede, sorry, I'm rabbiting on a bit here, but I will concede something that David mentioned, that certificates indicate a willingness to apply oneself to that knowledge. I agree with that. However, the flip side is not true. a willingness to apply myself shouldn't always be mentioned by a certificate, because when I've interviewed people, I look at certificates and qualifications, but above that, I look at experience. And then the first thing I look at is desire and motivation. I prefer to have somebody who comes across as passionate and excited about doing it, doesn't know how to do it, but by God, they can find out, rather than somebody who's done it numerous times and yeah, they're quite blasé about it, or somebody who's actually got a stack load, an A4 folder full of certifications, who just acts completely bored because it's beneath them. And you think, why the hell should I be hiring you? You know, so for me, right at the top of the tree, it is that desire and motivation. And I'm sure David will ascertain here, this is what he wants to see in his courses. He wants people to grab the bit by the horns and start running ahead of him. It's that passion we need to get into people through training.
David, yes.
Yes, certainly, Dave, 100%. Sorry, Rochelle, I'm excited over what you just said, Dave, and it's so true, because it is that unseen drive, that want, you know, that need, and the way you bring yourself across that carries the most weight. But being sort of very old in the industry of sort of trying to learn and trying to progress, I appreciate that a lot of people only have the opportunity by waiving that certificate. Most organizations won't allow people to even get to that point of an interview unless they've got a certification or 2 or 3. And as you can see, the industry itself has now challenged that even more by saying things like, okay, we need 6 certifications plus 20 years of experience. They misalign, and that's causing a lot of confusion.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say, David, is that you know, and I think Dave, you also mentioned certification can be that starting point, right? It can open up some doors, and even though it can open up some doors, there's more to it than just the piece of paper. We need to start challenging how one can apply, you know, and how have your behavior changed since you've attained, or since you've kind of been exposed and gotten the opportunity to challenge some of your mental models through the trainings and so on and so forth. And I see that we've got a question around a little bit, you know, we're talking about written exams. Maybe there's this, you know, it can be done through discussions, and maybe that's a great segue into a next question around, are we seeing any shifts in the industry and where we find ourselves today in 2021, you know, with people going a little bit more virtual as well? Are we seeing any shifts in the type of certification credentials that's you know, the market wants and really needs? Dave?
I'm just going to jump in with this one, and then I'm going to defer to Johan, because I know there are some certifications, or rather some positions, where there is no examination at the end, but it is actually an interview with a panel. I think the ITIL Master was one of them. And I remember I was talking to somebody about certain qualifications. Some of the high level ones in ITIL involved you being given a scenario, and then you were asked a question and you actually had to answer as being somebody in a position, what would you actually do in that scenario? So there was almost a written report of you discussing your approach, rather than a simple, which is it A, B, C, D? Now, I know Johan is actively very much involved in the certification or the examination side there. So Johan, I'm going to defer to you. Can you explore or expand a bit more on these exams? And I know about the ones that are just interviews.
Yeah, you know, it's sad to say, but part of the problem is the problem of scaling in economics. We use standardized testing because that's an easy and good way to actually scale and make it economically viable for people to do exams. If you gave me my choice, I would let you do a VOCE for every certificate that you do. do an in-depth interview. So it's a difficult question. I don't think we've got a good answer for that, but what we're certainly trying to do as we build our partner network, also around some IP that we've developed, is really in-depth coaching and hand-holding. You know, so I can think back to the last 20 years and I can name you on maybe twice two hands the good students that I had in classrooms. Why? Because they stayed in contact afterwards, after I've invited them to do so. They're still some friend of mine, and quite often I do get a call or an email or whatever saying, yeah, what do I do in this situation? Yeah, and unfortunately, for some trainers that's standing in front of a classroom, it's a job. It's not a calling. And I think education is a calling.
Yeah, totally. And if I could just add to that and suggest that what the future trend for me of good certification practices is creating communities of practice, communities of reference, communities of association, so that we can bring the problem to the table and we use the training and the certification model to create a more transparent model. So I've certainly seen and tried to engage with training where it's not just the 2 days or the 3 days worth of training, it's the relationship that you build afterwards, the way you try to reinvent your training to align with real world practices, and you invite the participants to not just be a recipient of information, but also a sharer of knowledge. And that way you keep that continuous learning profile going. And what you do is you increase the value of that certification that you're enabling. So very quickly, a lot of organizations now, certainly training organizations, have moved away from doing a course or attending some classes, doing a quick multiple choice, and then that's it. Hey, you've achieved it. Sort of certification bodies now are growing because they're looking for an organic approach, a problem-based understanding. Even a more coaching type mindset, which means the half-hour exam afterwards has no value. What has value is that continued growing relationship, and I look forward to that progressing, not just from the classroom, but into the workplace itself. Yeah, sorry, Johan.
No, I'm not interrupting you. I'm just saying I want to add something. Go for it.
Yeah, no, please. It's a great segue.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, now I can't remember what I wanted to say.
The pressure, Well,
in that case, I'll quickly jump in with something that will support David until Johan gets his train of thought. I've always maintained that that the trainer is also a student themselves. They can learn from their students. Okay, and I've also thought, and I've just lost my train of thought on that one as well. Yes, I've always thought that the learning doesn't finish when the training course is over. So every training course I do, everyone has my details and they're free to contact me on that. Now, I just want to go back to one question, which hopefully should segue into what Johan was thinking about there, to do with the vice versa, just through discussion instead of a written examination, because David did mention about the purpose of the certificate is to actually prove capability or show something. And I feel it's actually a lot of times the certificates are actually intended for the employer, not the employee. My certificates don't mean a great deal to me. They mean it to my future employer. And it's often used as a filtering criteria for an interview, because when people say, but that qualification got you the job. No, it didn't. It got me the interview. So the point there about vice versa, what about discussion instead of written examination? That's pretty much what an interview is about. If you think about it, we have certificates to say people have attained a certain level, but then when we interview, we're looking at more intangible, we're looking at behavioral aspects. We're actually saying 10 people here all have the right certifications, but out of these 10 people, which one will I pick and why? And you don't get that unless you go through the interview. That cannot be assessed.
Yeah, so two things that I just want to add is that we've tried to convince customers not to do classroom training, but rather allow training in the workplace. So that we take a longer period of time to teach the same theory, but we teach it while we're doing it. And that's much more meaningful, and the results and a manager quite often says, I know training and certification is important, but I've got absolutely no way of evaluating the return on investment. That's one of the ways that you can do that. And unfortunately, this gateway paper that certificates has become is actually getting worse, because first level filtering in the job market is now computer-based. And so that puts the person that doesn't have the certificate at a disadvantage, where they may, quite honestly, have been the best candidate for the job. So I think employers also need to think their criteria, or the criteria that they use to filter, giving people the opportunities to do a job. Not everybody learns theory well. Not everybody writes exams well. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that they haven't got something or something brilliant to contribute.
100%, and I think this is kind of tying to the question around role playing in the workplace. So how do we take that theory, which is, if you think about the Cynefin, sense making framework, so theory which is applied in a classroom in a very obvious domain, right? It's and trying to solve also even obvious or even maybe some complicated scenarios, but the workplace is in the complex domain. So that means there isn't necessarily just one response or one way in order to solve the problems that we're gaining through this theory. So how do we bridge that gap, knowing that we're playing in the complex domain? And Johan, I see your hand is up.
Yeah. So just bear in mind that actually we know how to do that. Good academic institutions or science institutions has done that for years. Yeah. And that's by teaching people how to solve problems. And instead of trying to teach them answers. And I think that's really necessary. One of the most critical skills that anybody can have in the workplace of tomorrow is the ability to solve problems.
Yeah,
David.
If I could just jump on the back of that and again suggest that that's why it's no longer, in fact, it's probably a battle between the existing status quo of the kudos a certification gives you against the value that you can get out of them now. A lot of people, and I know lots of people who come to talk to me and they want to learn maybe an agile certification, and the first thing they do is they ask for a certification type that is well known rather than training that aligns to the problem that they need to address. And I sometimes find it interesting that somebody wants to come on to a particular course that advance an approach, but you see the problems that the classroom exhibits do not warrant that approach you're coaching. And it's so interesting. And it really, what you want to say is, no, look, based upon this problem, let's address it here. But then you're not aligning to the expectation of this certificate. And I'll leave that very wide open because it is a huge topic and a challenge that I've seen over the years.
Oh, yes, as a trainer, I can attest to that 100%. Sticking to the curriculum versus, and also kind of striving for that titles, in the hope that that's going to solve the problems and that you're dealing with in your environment. And it's not necessarily a cookie cutter. It's not something, the golden solution. There isn't a golden solution out there. We should maybe flip it around to say, how can I challenge my mental models? How can I, change the way that I view the problems and equip myself with different tools in order to kind of reframe those problems and challenge them? Like, I think it's Einstein that said, you can't solve the problem with the same kind of thinking you had when you created it, or at least I think he made it famous. And that's so true, right? So it doesn't even help if you go for all the certification and you've got that list that you spoke about, this whole stack book of certifications, but you're still applying the same thinking to your problems. We need to challenge our mental models around how we want to come up with solutions, like Johan mentioned.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yes.
I just quickly want to add, and I mean, I've got a stack this thick of certificates. So I'm not saying they don't have value, but what they were points of reference. none of them were a solution to anything. Yeah, the solution was found in the workplace, in a scenario, in being able to apply what I've learned to a specific context. Now, I don't know how you test that, if you want to scale that, because to my mind, the only one way that you can do that is by bringing apprenticeships back. And I'm a big fan of the apprenticeship model.
Well, we
And
kind
that's
of do
not,
apprenticeships.
yeah, sorry, Dave. I just wanted to make a joke. That's not the Star
Sorry.
Wars thinking apprenticeship. Go on. No. Okay.
No.
Dave, sorry.
Sorry, I jumped in a bit quickly there. Yeah, who's the apprentice and who's the master? But you're correct in the sense of we do kind of have an apprenticeship in the sense of a mentoring model, but I don't think it's as formalized as apprenticeships used to be. Apprenticeships were always about learning from somebody else, not just necessarily learn the right things, but learning by their mistakes. But the person who was the master, in effect, wasn't just showing and assessing, but there's a huge amount of knowledge transfer, and it almost fits the Agile idea of or the Agile manifesto of the best way of conveying information is face to face. You can actually see somebody do it, and I'm sure all of us here have learned how to do something by watching a YouTube video rather than reading an article on how it's done. We can see the info there. But I just want to come back to Shallow's point, because even though it's a slightly offline question about the Agile certification, I still think this is a relevant point. Now, a lot of people talk about Agile certifications, but I think the term Agile certification itself is a misnomer in terms. If you think of what the certification is, it's a metric. It's evidence you've answered X number of questions correctly, and it's nothing to do with capability. So for me, it's a bit of an unagile metric. One of these is just like judging a chef by how many meals they've cooked, or judging the performance of a team by how many story points they've burned through. So there are lots of certifications out there, and if you take a look at just #Scrum, you'll see that 60% of the posts are all about people boasting what certification they've just got, even if it's just sitting on the LinkedIn course. Then you've got another 30 people boasting about courses for certification, but they're all talking about, and this can start your career. None of it's actually talking about, this can improve your thinking ability. This can improve you as a person. Very few of them do. There's only the occasional post when people say, I went on this course and I learned a great deal that opened my eyes, rather than I passed a certificate, I can now apply for these jobs. So I think there's a problem that supply will always meet demand. While certification is always used as hiring criteria, there will always be a certification mill. Now, sadly, I can't give an opinion on which is the certification in highest demand, and therefore which nets the most highest paid salary remuneration. But what Johan was talking about is, you get hard to do a certain job, and then within the job, people realize what value you're bringing because of not what's on the bit of paper, but what you start to do in that job. So even though I'm regarded as being a trainer, that's my job title, I do a huge amount of other things in the post. But I like the fact that people think you're just a trainer. Actually, I've done a huge amount more, and I just help whereabouts I can. And I think David's in the same position as well. So I'll shut up now and hand over to one of my colleagues.
David, you had your...
Yes, sorry, I was just going to roll on the back of that, and it's really, really key what you're saying, Dave, especially if, I'm looking at a question here that says, since employees look for certifications, then the certifying organizations shoulder much greater responsibility. And that touches to me on what you're saying, Dave, is that the certifying organization, they should be more accountable. And as trainers, we find that our greatest experience is in the real world. We take what we go out there and we train, and then we consult, and then we take back that experience and we then try to regurgitate it as best as we can to everybody, not on the knowledge that we're going to share everything, that we're going to throw enough in the air for people to pick something that's irrelevant, take it away, experiment and grow on it. And I find that lots of certifying organizations, because they're more focused on the huge revenue, they tend to spend less time investing in their trainer network. And if we could improve that or challenge them in such a way to make it less linear, less one specific model of certification, as opposed to a group of certifications that fulfill needs, you'll get a better value take for the recipients and for trainers in our ability to deliver.
And maybe David, just to add from the chats that we have here. So we've got some comments around the coaching to continue during work, you know, after that certification period. So maybe shining a light and providing a little bit more owner and responsibility on the trainer itself to not just go through the checklist of, okay, cool, I shared this content, I've shared the following slide for you, you did a check-in here, you did quickly a written something, but and see how we can apply it, how can you bridge that gap. And is that viable? Yuan, you spoke about scalability. Is that really a viable approach?
That's the dilemma that we're sitting with. Yeah. So as I mentioned when we started this conversation, the only formal certifications that I still teach are those that has got a practical component. But the problem with doing these type of practical exercises, especially if they're contained and they're not in the workplace, is that the exercise will be as good as your trainer. And I'm coming back to this situation where there's a ton of organizations, the training for them is a means to make money. And because they want to make money, I mean, there's only two variables in training: more people in the classroom, and you pay less for your trainer. Now you can see where I'm going to. Now, if the trainer meets all the requirements on paper, being able to stand in front of the classroom, but they've never actually done it, how the hell can anybody learn from them? And that's one of the, but you know, how do you stop somebody from doing that? Yeah, you also can't. I think the industry is faced with some really difficult questions in terms of remodeling ourselves.
Yes, so I love how you phrased it, right? The industry is faced with a problem of how do we refocus? How do we, you know, instead of trying to capitalize and just, you know, see how many different types of certifications we can get out there, how can we kind of come back to basics? We're all trying to solve some problems that we're facing and trying to improve, you know, in our organizations, as an individual, as a group of people. And how do we kind of create those communities of practice, maybe to support that growth, to support that learning? Because I know for a fact, I think Dave, you mentioned your trainer learns. Me as a trainer, I learn more if I train, and that's quite a shocking revelation to say, right? So imagine I'm putting that hat of expert on, but I learn more every single time I train, because it's the context that we're getting in the conversations, the different experiences. So the question that we've got also here is, what do we think about maybe experienced professional training in-house, and how can we maybe look at making that a bit more effective?
Well, I'll happily take this one, because I just want to go back to something that you mentioned about a trainer's credibility may be hampered if they can't show that they've done the stuff out in the world. But I also believe that a trainer shouldn't be the person who knows all there is to know about the particular subject. I feel my job as a trainer is that I may be in a room where there's already people with a lot of knowledge in the room, and my job is to try and draw it out of those people. So they're not just learning from me, they're learning from others. And Rochelle, I'm sure you've been in a situation where something said on one course, later on you use it as an anecdote for another. So what we're doing is just spreading the knowledge around. Now, there's an interesting point. Actually, RC Goyle, I'm sure I know you. I may be connected to you already. The point there about experienced professional training in-house could be more effective. I think there are pros and cons to that. The pro part is simply that there's going to be a lot of business knowledge, so somebody could take that particular training and put it into context there, and also explain that when you do this training, by the way, Nisha has already been in this course and knows this stuff, okay, and Sumana has actually, they train as an SM, so if you need any questions, go and ask them. You can start to try and encourage people within the business to go and see others, whereupon if Johan comes into one organization, he may not know any people there. And I've been in a situation where everyone I'm facing is a complete stranger. So I like going back to places where I suddenly start to see older faces, and I recount what happened on previous courses, and it helps cement that this is training that seems to be specific to them rather than just a stranger coming in for 2 days and then vanishing. However, I am aware that the reason why we sometimes hire consultants and experts externally is because they don't have the same baggage as us internally. They can actually view things without the blinkers, and also they're not hampered by saying the wrong thing because management are going to have a go at them. No, the reason why we've been brought in is because things are not working internally, and we've been brought in to shake it up. Okay, so we often actually have the courage of voicing things that people know but nobody actually wants to say, and only then do we start to disrupt. And I think, Johan, you mentioned about you're the shit stirrer. I often think I'm not the person who starts trouble, but I start people thinking, and that's when trouble begins. And when you have that situation, when you start to address those, and David, you've held a mirror up and say, look, do you actually think this is a good idea? Suddenly, people stop and think carefully about what they're doing, and that's when the change happens. You've got to get people to face up to that. So I don't know if somebody internal will actually be in the right position of saying that. It's just Dave, he's jaded, he's been here for 5 years ago. Now let's get David or Johan in, who can actually come up with the same thing, and suddenly it's heard differently because it's somebody external. So,
Yeah.
Johan?
So some of my most effective customers actually do both. So there's a champion for a specific type of learning. Most of the times it's around business agility or agile or something like that, that drives the initiative internally. So that's sort of like an internal coach. But in virtually every scenario that I can think of where the guys are doing well, that person has got an external coach. Okay. And those guys, quite often, I will get a mail, whenever you got 5 minutes, I need to chat to you about this. What do you think about this? Yeah, and because unfortunately, we don't see our own mistakes. And sometimes it does take the perspective of an outsider just to say, do you know what? Have you thought of this? Or can I tell you a story about what happened with me in another context? And then you decide whether this is a good idea or not.
100%. Yeah, being that mirror, and I think David, I'll hand over to you now. I think that the technical term for not seeing the problems that's right in front of you is called pickled. But I'm being sarcastic now. It's maybe not. But if you're part of the problem, right, you're pickled. You cannot see beyond what is right in front of you. It's difficult because it's emotional. You've got a stake in it. So getting someone maybe of a different perspective that isn't emotionally so invested in and kind of triggered by the problems can definitely help. David, I see you also wanted to add in.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this whole conversation piece, and it talks around the fact that certification and the training model for certification is evolving at a very, very rapid rate. We're moving from the ideal of a fixed scope, a fixed time, and a fixed result to a very much, I think you mentioned it initially, Rochelle, a sense-making enablement approach. What we have to also now try to do is align the changes from a 2-day, 3-day week course, where it's now spread over weeks and months and potentially years. I've been involved with some that, you know, that it's short continuous learning, where you move from the impartation of information to sharing of experiences to provide value. We've got to find a way to convince the marketplace that the decision is not based on a piece of paper that says you are this. What it should say is you have embarked on this journey and you have information that will enable an organization. And that enablement may not necessarily mean a positive. It will mean an opportunity for change. And we all know that change is a requirement for us to move forward and learn fast. And I think we've just got to find a way to get our clients to appreciate that certifications is not a silver bullet, as I've heard it being used many times. It's an enabler that changes over time.
Now, it's interesting that if you talk about organizations who started to implement learning and development divisions within the organization, they acknowledge that this issue of micro-learning is a good idea. The challenge that we as an industry need to think about is how are you going to, because remember, certification is a third party saying that another party is good enough to have this credential, certificate, or whatever. So it would be great if we can find a way of bringing those two worlds together, and let the certification body be the accreditor of quality of learning. But that's gonna take quite a lot of thinking for us to be able to do that. But certainly it means that the models need to change quite substantially. Yeah.
And for the models to change, what is the responsibility of the trainees in challenging the current models that's out there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry, Rochelle,
yeah.
I wanted to say that one of the things that happens is that when somebody becomes certified in a certain topic, they feel obliged to push that regardless of what what the situation actually asks for. And one of the things we can do as trainees and trainers is to be willing to say, look, this isn't actually going to work. This is an approach. Can we take a percentage, not be wrapped around the whole solution, and feel like we have to drive it forward? Yeah, it's interesting because I know that I try to get involved with people post training, and I try to involve coaching as a two-way opportunity, so get as much feedback as possible and continue learning outward and inward. And you'll find that a great percentage of people that I work with turn around and say, well, we're trying to get this to work, we're trying to convince the business. And sometimes it's, don't try and convince them because you've just spent £1,000, £2,000, £3,000 on learning this. Understand the problem and be as quick to say that's not going to be effective, because ultimately training or learning is about being able to fail fast, not put a square brick into a round hole sort of thing. So we need to be able to sometimes put our hand up as trainers and as certified individuals and say this approach is not going to work.
Yeah.
I agree with that point, because as a trainer, I've been bought out to many companies, and they're talking about courses, but they see training as being a solution to the problem where they don't fully understand the problem. And unfortunately, yes, I can do what you've asked me to do, and I will take your money, and I'll correctly deliver the training course you want, but it won't fulfill your need. And then we're going to get blamed because suddenly person X, who can't do activity Z, still can't do it after the training course. So why did we send you on the training course in the first place? Well, was it actually the right course? So coming back to David's point, unless we recognize what the problems are we're trying to fix, it's very difficult to actually see training as being that solution.
Yeah,
100%. And I see that we're heading towards the end of our time together. So I was actually wondering, and David, you mentioned something great. So, you know, we really learn through failure, and are we creating opportunities to fail so that we can learn in our current models and the way that we and how much we give attention and kind of emphasis on certification. So maybe just as to slowly start wrapping up, if I can get some final thoughts from each of you, just to kind of summarize your current thinking on the topic of the future of certification. Is there anyone that would like to go first?
Well, I'll throw mine in. Sadly, certification is here to stay. There's no doubt about it. But we actually need to question what our use of them is, what they actually mean for us, and we should also learn to look beyond them. So it's one ingredient that's in the mix, but it's not the only ingredient. It's certainly not the key ingredient. It should be treated as the first rung of the ladder, not a criteria for which, once you've got that certificate, we can then just open the doors and give you the keys of the kingdom. That's my feeling.
Thanks.
Possibly, Joanne, I'd like you to, if you wouldn't mind closing, so I will quickly jump in and suggest that as training organizations and as people who have been certified, what we want to try and do is maybe introduce greater communities of practice, greater learning forums. So as a training organization, when we do training, let's create those places where people can collaborate, because ultimately that's what training is all about, an opportunity to collaborate and share. And if we can make that mandatory, what we're doing is we're taking the training beyond the limited scope. And as trainers, we're part of that community. We will learn. As coaches, we will learn. As the ones who've been receiving the sharing, they will learn, and they will also be empowered. So I think that is something that we have within our control.
Yeah. So I love that idea of communities. And just bear in mind, people don't join a community because they're told to, or even because they've got the opportunity to. They join a community because they've got a sense of belonging, and that sense of belonging most probably comes from the fact that other people in that community, and the only one they most of the times know is their trainer, cares. So you're not going to create a community unless we care, and I think trainers need to care more, number one. And the last thing that I just want to leave with you is I've also been involved in the development of a number of best practices and standards. Now, most people know that they've got a problem, and then they think best practice is going to solve the problem for them. That is a complete misnomer. For something to be best practice, it's always old proven ideas. And if you've got a new challenge, you can best practice as much as you want, and it's not going to solve your problem. I think all trainers must also, and all certification bodies must also make sure that the organization that trains people, the first thing that they say to people or learn to teach to people is to say, how do you identify a problem? And once you've identified the problem, what are the things that you can do about it? Training is one of them, because that's sitting in the obvious domain, but what about the others?
100%. Oh, thanks so much. I really want to thank the panelists, Yuan, David, and Dave. This has been really insightful. It's also energizing me quite a lot, and I know we can continue this conversation over and well for still a few hours to come. But I'm going to just thank you for your time. Thank you for the participants' questions. And we've got about 6 minutes left. So if there's any other questions, please feel free to ask it now. Otherwise, I am going to hand over to Prashant again to close us off. Great. I don't see any questions coming in. Prashant, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Oh, thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone. Johan, Dave, David. It was fantastic, and I think the energy which you brought in and the discussion which was really fantastic. I think we have to go through a couple of times of recording to understand the complete the thoughts of yours and deep dive in. And also thanks Rochelle for moderating it in such a fantastic way. Uh, Thank you very much for accommodating in the short notice and make within your busy schedule. We look forward to collaborate with you all for future events. Once again, thank you very much. With this, we will come to the end of our Agile Network India December event, and even this was the last session for 2021. So looking for more and more sessions and events for 2022 with more different strategies to learn. I would like to welcome you all once again for next year, and in advance wish you everyone a happy new year and a happy Christmas.
Thank you for the
everyone.
opportunity.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Johan. And also thanks the participants for having the patience and being part of the event for all 2 days. Thank you very much. Yes, over to you, Rachel.
Okay,
Thanks.
Merry Christmas to all.
Thank you. Merry
Thanks,
Christmas.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Splendid.
Bye-bye.
Yes, and happy 2022. Let's hope it brings things better next year.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Cool. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye.